Louis XIV, the Sun King, ruled France for 72 years, 1643 to 1715, making him the longest reigning monarch in European history. Under his leadership, France became Europe's dominant power, with Versailles symbolizing royal grandeur. Louis's reign was marked by displays of wealth, military expansions, and court rituals that solidified his image of eternal vitality and divine right. However, in his final years, this vibrant ruler became a shadow of his former self, crippled by disease and decay, highlighting the fragility of power and the inevitable decline that comes with it. The Sun King, a symbol of power and grandeur. Louis XIV was born on September 5, 1638, to King Louis XIII and Anne of Austria. He ascended to the throne at the tender age of 5, following his father's death in 1643. Raised not as a child, but as the living embodiment of divine right, Louis was groomed to be the symbol of France's greatness. From the very beginning, his image was carefully crafted. His posture was perfect, his movements rehearsed, and his presence electrifying. To foreign dignitaries and courtiers, his mere entrance into a room was enough to change the atmosphere entirely. It was no surprise then that, even before taking the throne, Louis was known as the Sun King. His radiance, both literal and figurative, shone brightly throughout France and Europe. As he matured, Louis XIV began to consolidate his power. His crowning achievement, Versailles, was an architectural marvel that symbolized both his power and his control over the French court. The palace was not just a residence, it was a stage for the grandest political performance in Europe. Every decision, every action, every whisper in the hallways of Versailles led back to Louis. His court became the center of power, and all of France revolved around the Sun King. But as the years passed, Louis's health began to deteriorate, marking the slow decline of both his physical self and his reign. The decline of a king. By the late 1680s, Louis's once imposing figure had started to show signs of decline. His body, once the image of vigor, began to fail him. Chronic digestive pain kept him in his private chambers, and hemorrhoids made standing a painful ordeal. His breath, once fragrant with the finest perfumes, became foul, and his teeth rotted to the gum line. Foreign ambassadors who once eagerly awaited an audience with the Sun King now struggled to endure his company. Despite his deteriorating condition, Louis refused to relinquish his royal duties. His presence, though diminished, was still a commanding one, and he insisted on maintaining the daily rituals of Versailles, even as his health rapidly declined. It was during this period of physical suffering that Louis began to show a shift in behavior. He became more isolated, trusting fewer and fewer people. He dismissed long-standing allies and replaced them with priests and loyalists who would serve only him. The king, who had once dazzled Europe with his grandeur, now found solace in the company of those who reaffirmed his control. A body in decay. As Louis grew older, his physical condition worsened. He became increasingly immobile, unable to walk without assistance. His once majestic posture was now bent, and his legs weakened to the point where even walking down a corridor required the help of a cane or a servant. The royal tailor had to make adjustments to his clothing, hiding the physical changes that were occurring in the aging king's body. Louis's diet, once a symbol of opulence, contributed significantly to his decline. His meals, which were often long and extravagant, consisted of several courses, including rich game, pâtés, and thick sauces. This indulgence, combined with his sedentary lifestyle, wreaked havoc on his digestive system. His condition worsened over time, and by the early 1700s, his health had reached a critical point. Ulcers began to form on his legs, and the king's physicians, desperate to treat him, resorted to painful treatments like daily lancing, cauterization, and the application of hot cloths soaked in spirits. Despite their efforts, the wounds on his legs continued to worsen. As the ulcers grew, they began to turn black, a sign of gangrene. The stench from his decaying flesh became unbearable. Louis's once commanding presence was now accompanied by the overpowering odor of infection. At times, he would beg his attendants to amputate the leg, but the gangrene had spread too far. His health continued to deteriorate, and his mind, once sharp and calculating, began to falter. The final days. By the time the summer of 1715 arrived, Louis's condition was beyond repair. His leg, once a symbol of his strength, had become a grotesque mass of decaying flesh. The infection had spread beyond the skin, reaching the bone. His body temperature fluctuated wildly, and he became too weak to even lift a spoon. Nurses reported that he moaned in Latin and called out to long-dead companions. His mind seemed to drift between delirium and lucidity. Despite his suffering, Louis insisted on maintaining the rituals of the court. He continued to receive ministers and courtiers propped up in his bed, even as his body failed him. His physicians, now mere bystanders to his decay, continued their futile attempts to save him, but the king's body was beyond their reach. In the final weeks of his life, Louis became obsessed with his mortality. His fear of assassination grew, and he insisted that all treatments be conducted under the supervision of trusted servants. He was no longer the all-powerful monarch who had once bent Europe to his will. Instead, he was a dying man, desperate to maintain control over a body that was betraying him. On August 29, 1715, a self-proclaimed healer named Brune entered the king's chamber, offering a miraculous remedy that he claimed would purify the king's body. For a brief moment, Louis felt some relief, but it was short-lived. The gangrene had already spread too far. The pain in his leg returned with such intensity that even the opiates could not numb it. His fever spiked, and his breathing slowed. Louis XIV's body had finally reached the point of no return. A final farewell. In his final days, Louis spoke to his heir, his 5-year-old great-grandson, advising him to avoid the mistakes that he had made during his reign. "Do not follow the bad example which I have set you," he said. "I have often undertaken war too lightly and sustained it for vanity. Do not imitate me, but be a peaceful prince." These were his final words of counsel, offered in the hope that his heir would rule more wisely and with greater compassion than he had. On September 1st, 1715, Louis XIV's breathing slowed, and his body finally succumbed to the ravages of infection. His death marked the end of a reign that had lasted over 7 decades. The man who had once declared, "L'État, c'est moi," I am the state, had finally breathed his last, and the empire he had built began to crumble. The aftermath. Louis XIV's death marked not only a personal tragedy, but also the collapse of the monarchy he had built. Once synonymous with grandeur, the Sun King now lay in a bloated, corrupted coffin, his final moments a stark contrast to his radiant image. The court, still clinging to the illusion of normalcy, whispered about war and succession near the corpse of their king. His body, once a symbol of divine power, had become a grotesque reminder of inevitable decay. The funeral procession, a grand spectacle with trumpets and bishops in gold robes, could not mask the stench of death. The king's bloated body required a widened coffin, and the air around Saint-Denis was thick with rot, leaving mourners confronted with the truth of Louis's physical demise. A stark contrast, myth versus reality. The death of Louis XIV highlighted the stark contrast between the myth of his reign and its grim reality. His portraits, once symbols of eternal power, were shattered by the decaying body that lay in state. Louis's long reign, once envied, left France in debt, with a weakened monarchy and a struggling population. His successors inherited a crumbling legacy, burdened by his excesses and failures. The Sun King's final days remind us that, no matter how dazzling power may seem, decay will always prevail. Ultimately, Louis XIV, like all men, was powerless against time and nature. His reign, once seen as divine, ended not with celebration, but with silence and decay. And there you have it. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the final days of one of history's most influential monarchs, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more captivating stories from the past. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.